We are live on ClickOrlando.com. I'm morning anchor Kirsten O'Connor, joined today by Jason Johnson, our News 6 legal expert. We are talking about the Noor Salman trial again. So we are going into closing arguments today.
Yeah, we're kind of in the tail stretch of the trial. For most people, this is kind of the end of the road for what they've experienced in terms of watching courtroom drama shows. They understand that this is the chance for both the government and the defense to wrap everything up for the jury before the jury goes into their deliberation room to decide the fate of the defendant. This is their last chance to say anything to the jury before they go into the deliberation room. If the jury has any questions for the court, they will have those written down, and then they will be read by the judge to the counsel, and they'll decide how to respond to that. So this is kind of their last chance to say anything directly to the jurors before they reach their verdict.
And we were talking a little bit this morning around the newsroom. They gave an estimation yesterday of how long they think these arguments will last.
Right.
What is that estimation?
So the government has estimated that they will take about 3 hours for their closing statement, and then the defense has estimated they'll take about 90 minutes. We have seen throughout the course of this trial, and this is fairly common, that counsel tend to overestimate the amount of time they'll take for things. People may think that you shouldn't be doing that. You should give it exactly how much time you think. But when you're dealing with the court and you're dealing with the efficient use of court resources, you want to make sure that you don't underestimate how much time you're going to take for something. Have the court schedule something on the back end of your argument, and then have the court bump that because you're going over. I don't think there's much risk of that in this case because it's such a high-profile case, and the court knows how important it is and has set aside a sufficient amount of time to deal with these issues. But it's sort of a habit of the lawyers to overestimate how much time you're going to take.
It makes sense, though. It does. And it'll be starting in about 30 minutes from now. So with that estimation, we could potentially have both of them done before we break for lunch.
That's a possibility. I think the court will probably extend the lunch hour a little bit, or extend the beginning of the lunch hour a little bit to let both sides finish. He won't want to have a break between their presentations. It's possible that if the government takes the full 3 hours, he'll break for lunch and then have the defense come back, give their closing, and then the government gets its one little last bite at the apple to make its final statement before the jury's finally charged by the judge, and then they begin their deliberations. But I fully anticipate that by the end of this afternoon, the jury will have begun their deliberations in this case.
And Jason, we talked yesterday afternoon, and one of the things that struck me that you mentioned, because I didn't know it myself, is that these jury members have not spoken to one another yet. They've been in this process together for weeks now, but never, having any idea what anyone else feels or thinks. And this will be the first time that they do.
Yeah, I mean, they can talk to each other about, idle chit-chat, what's your name, what do you do, that kind of thing, but they're not allowed to discuss the case. Yeah. The judge admonished them at the beginning when they were first seated that you are not allowed to discuss this case, in addition to not being able to do any outside research or post anything on social media or read any news accounts, that you're not allowed to discuss this case with each other until you get into the privacy of the deliberation room. The idea there is that if members of the jury start discussing the evidence as it dribbles in, they may prejudge things and formulate a preliminary opinion on the guilt or innocence of the accused before they've heard all the evidence, and the court doesn't want them to do that. So it really prevents them from allowing that to happen by requiring them to wait until they get into the deliberation room before they can discuss any of the evidence that's been presented.
It makes sense, though, because if you sit and you talk with somebody at length, about a story that you heard that day, and you don't talk to that same person the next day, it doesn't stick in your memory the way that...
Right, but ultimately it goes to one of the kind of underlying fundamental principles of our criminal justice system, and that is the due process rights of the accused. Remember that she starts with a completely clean slate. She has to prove nothing in this case. The burden is on the government all the way through the entire case to prove that she committed these crimes beyond a reasonable doubt. And so the accused starts with a clean slate, and the idea is to make sure that they get a fair trial. If they are convicted, we want to make sure that the process was completely fair. And one of those methods is to make sure that the jury does not prejudge the guilt or innocence of the accused.
One of the things we also talked about leading up when we were still in jury selection, we were doing these ClickOrlando.com live chats with our legal experts, is the possibility that the jury could be sequestered. That did not happen. Is there still a chance that that could happen?
No, I don't think that's going to happen. It's happened in some other high-profile cases over the years, notably with the O.J. Simpson trial, but it's not common. It's very uncommon to have a jury sequestered. It usually only occurs in extremely high-profile cases that are going to be held over an extended period of time. And the judge just didn't feel it was necessary in this case, and I think defendants can certainly get fair trials without the jury being sequestered. If the jury abides by the admonishments that the judge has given them, then there's nothing wrong with them going home at the end of the day and being with their families. I think the interesting part of where we are now is we have heard all of the evidence, but at the beginning of this case, a lot of the family members who were attending trial said, I don't necessarily care so much about whether Noor Salman is convicted of this. I want some answers. I want to get some closure about what happened. We have, as a community, been fairly well in the dark about the specifics of what occurred that night because of the ongoing investigation and the criminal trial that was pending. But through the evidence that's been presented, we have gotten a much clearer picture of what actually went down that night. And I think there's a lot of information that was given to us that we simply didn't know. That he had retreated into the bathroom because his gun jammed, that he was immediately engaged by one of the armed officers who then retreated. And that has brought up a lot of issues that have come up since the Parkland shooting, but that it took so long and that police were inside the Pulse nightclub within a half an hour of the shooting, but it was a full 3 hours before they took him down and he was killed. So a lot happened in that interim period that we simply didn't know about prior to this trial starting, and so I think there's been a lot of information that has been gleaned from the evidence that was presented, and hopefully, verdict aside, that has given some of the families some closure.
Perhaps one of the most important pieces that we got from this trial was that he had cased other areas and other nightclubs before Pulse.
Yeah, that was a big surprise, I think, at least to me. I had read that he and his wife had gone and cased Disney Springs, but before the defense's motion limiting at the beginning of the trial, where they disclosed that the forensic evidence doesn't support that they ever actually cased the Pulse nightclub. Part of that was the forensic evidence showing where he was on the night of the attack, that he had first gone to Disney Springs and spent a significant amount of time out there, and then gone to Epcot Center before finally deciding to go to downtown Orlando nightclubs. It certainly does not diminish at all the magnitude of what happened at Pulse or the magnitude of what happened to the gay and lesbian community in Central Florida, but I think we would be having a much different discussion, and the impact on the community would have not necessarily been greater, but very different had this attack occurred at a Disney property.
One of the other big pieces that we got yesterday was we learned that Noor Salman would not be taking the stand. That was something a lot of people were, I don't want to say hoping for, but thinking could happen. It was a possibility. Is there a possibility that we could hear from her one day if she's not convicted?
Certainly, she has the First Amendment right to free speech, just as everybody else does under our Constitution. And if she is either convicted or acquitted, you may hear her tell her story. I'm not surprised at all that she didn't testify in the trial. As we discussed yesterday, doing so is fraught with risk. And the defense has to sort of weigh the pros and cons, the risks and benefits of doing that. And it's typically a last-minute decision. And I think Mr. O'Mara made a good point yesterday that that's one of the big reasons you didn't hear any discussion of the alleged abuse that we heard so much about before the trial, because to really get that evidence in, you would have needed Ms. Salman to testify. And so the defense, not knowing until the end of the case whether they would put her on the stand, didn't mention any of that abuse during its opening statement, because the last thing you want to do is tell the jury you're going to give them some evidence and then not come through during the course of the trial. So I'm not surprised that she didn't testify. I think we all hope to hear from her one day. I certainly hoped that she would testify because I wanted to hear her version of how this all went down, but I'm not surprised that she didn't.
From a legal standpoint, would it ever be advised for her to come out and use her right to free speech, or as a lawyer, would you tell your client, you know what, you should not come out and talk about this?
Certainly, if she is acquitted, there's no potential criminal ramifications for her because of the double jeopardy rules under the Constitution. You can't be tried for the same crime twice. So if she's acquitted, it's done for her in terms of this crime, or these crimes that she's been charged with. Potentially, if she were to admit some wrongdoing that led to the deaths of these people, there could be some civil actions against her for wrongful death or something along those lines. But I suspect that she may talk one day, and there are ways that she can, give information that doesn't expose her to that kind of liability.
Would you say, just in your opinion and your experience, that you see this ending today, tomorrow, by the end of the week?
It's, like I said yesterday, trying to predict how long a jury will take in its deliberations is a fool's errand, and I try not to play the fool. You just never know how long that they will take. I expect that they will be deliberative in the process, that they will heed the judge's admonitions about reviewing the evidence and taking the process seriously. So you just never know. I would hope that it doesn't take too long and that this isn't a long, strung-out process. But I certainly believe in our criminal justice system, and I want Ms. Salman to get a fair trial, no matter what the verdict is, and so I hope the jury takes its deliberation seriously.
All right, Jason Johnson of the Lowndes Law Firm with us here on clickorlando.com for our early morning chat. We will have another one of these scheduled at 12:30, and of course News 6 is committed to staying on top of this. We have reporters in the courtroom since it's a federal trial. We don't have any cameras in there, but as soon as a verdict is reached, we will bring it to you live on News 6 and on clickorlando.com. Thanks again for joining us. We'll see you at 12:30.
Thanks, Kirsten.